I've been involved with this for over 30 years. And in fact, in the case of Mr. Grush, I had met him about March of 2022 and had been providing him information as well as folks he works with associated with the Senate Intelligence Committee and their investigators. And so I knew what he knew and the whistleblowers that he has. Because a lot of information that my group has, we've transferred over to these investigators. For example, we have over 700 primary whistleblowers. Now, remember, Mr. Grush is a secondary, meaning he didn't actually handle the craft or the bodies. He spoke to people who had. So we have about 700 folks like that. And we've been bringing them to DC through the SCIF or Arrow and the Pentagon. I think that what surprised me a little bit that was unfortunate is the conflation or the lack of distinction between the man-made UAPs. There are actual extraterrestrial vehicles, ETVs as they're called, but I think that because of that lack of distinction, Amanda I met quite a bit with, Congressman Burchett, asked about extraterrestrials harming or killing people. Those events that have been reported to Mr. Grush and others were actually done by human operations that are rogue and very criminal. So I think one of the complexities here that needs to get parsed out in future hearings that we're very much aware of, and even briefings that happen in the SCIF, is a distinction between what humans are doing and what is, let's call it, innate extraterrestrial activities. Now, I think the complexity of that is a barrier to its understanding. In other words, in 1991, I had a pretty senior intelligence official who was involved with this subject come to me. He says, if you tell the public the truth about this, the truth is less believable than the fiction we've been selling. So remember that in 1953, we have a document from the director of the CIA talking about the, quote, psychological warfare value of the UFO subject. There's a 1985 CIA document describing the psychological warfare value of their operations in Brazil and Argentina that have been abducting and torturing civilians made to look like an alien event. So when someone who's new to the subject, like Mr. Grush, who's quite young, and some of these congressmen who are just learning about it, they don't have the information yet, which is what we're trying to get to them, that you have to entertain two totally separate events going on, but they're copycat. So since, if you look at the reverse engineered human craft, we call them ARVs or alien reproduction vehicles, or ATs, just advanced technology craft, those simulate an ET craft pretty closely until you look at it up close. But in terms of their maneuverability, how they come and go, and we've also created what's called stagecraft to cause abductions of people. Now, why would that happen? Because they eventually want to sort of have a global militaristic totalitarian grip on the whole public about there being some alien invasion. It's like a bad Hollywood movie. But that's been the long-term defense plan since the 1950s, about 70 years on now, regarding the UFO issue. That's been why they've taken so much time curating and developing false flag operations such as abductions and mutilations and events like that, and even the murdering of innocent civilians in developing countries in Africa and South America. So that issue is the real crux of the problem. And I will tell your listeners, the biggest part of the secrecy is what I just said. And the next biggest is the fact we figured out how these things go. So we have a new film out, The Lost Century, and How to Retrieve It, that unpacks 100 years of very exotic technologies that have been sequestered and kept secret because if they were released, there would be no need for oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, et cetera. And so the interests that are maneuvering and manipulating this situation are extraordinarily powerful, have more assets and money than the entire US government. I'll say that on the record, and is an existential threat. But luckily, the Senate is about a year and a half ahead of the House. And there are people we're working with there who fully understand this crisis. There are special projects going on at the Pentagon that I can't say more about that we're involved with, who also understand this and are making plans to correct the problem, and meaning that these illegal and rogue operations are going to have to be stood down. One thing I want to ask your viewers, if you are in these operations currently, I know you don't know this unless you're very senior, on the management level, corporate or government. If a legitimate U.S. government entity, an FBI operation, comes to your facility, you are to put your weapons down and you are not to resist. Now, the reason I'm saying this, and I know it's ominous, is that these projects cannot be allowed to go on indefinitely. The gaslighting, the dissembling, this could go on for another 50 years. So I know for a fact that conclusions have been reached in some very high places that these operations are rogue, are illegal, and are a threat to world security and national security. But if you take, for example, I've gotten to know quite well Area 51 guy who was there for several years in his mid to late 20s and was read into projects there dealing with extraterrestrial and human operations, and also at Wright-Patterson and Eglin Air Force Base. And, he had no idea that at the upper reaches of management of those operations, that those were not being, supervised legally by the Congress or the president. Now, I found that out when I briefed the president CIA director in 1993. So I've had that baked into my cake for a long time. But most of these people, let's call them the very highly classified personnel, whistleblowers, that are firsthand witnesses, and they're not like Grush, who found out from firsthand, but the direct witnesses, like the Disclosure Project has, they have no idea that they're in an illegal project, but they need to get this message very quickly because they cannot. I understand that it's the chain of command and they're following orders, but at this point, read between the lines. The majority leader of the Senate is taking action to get to the bottom of this because he's not been read in. The oversight committees, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, senior people in the Pentagon that I briefed in the past, and for heaven's sakes, the sitting CIA director that I briefed. You can't have a project going forward that's acquiring extraterrestrial vehicles, reverse engineering them, developing advanced technologies that fly like a UAP, and do this all without oversight legally. If you do it that way, it is a rogue and unconstitutional project. Let me use this analogy. If you are going to go from one star system to another, you cannot go even at the speed of light in a straight line. Okay, it would take too long. It's like if you're from a star system that's 50,000 light years away, which is just in our own galaxy, it would take 50,000 years at the speed of light. Moreover, if you know Einstein's formulas, if you are just accelerating up to the speed of light, when you hit the speed of light, you take on infinite mass. So it's not possible. So the only way to go from point A to B in the cosmos is it's like a piece of paper that you fold space-time. Now, when you fold space-time, you're actually traversing other dimensions. It gets complicated, and you are actually all the physics that we deal with in the 3D universe are not operative in the other dimensional aspects of the cosmos. And so it's a bit of a misnomer to say these beings and craft are interdimensional but not extraterrestrial. A priori, if you're extraterrestrial and you're going from one star system to another, you have to be interdimensional because you're transiting through dimensions. Now, to make this a little more confused, there are beings that are not extraterrestrial that are from other dimensions, but not extraterrestrial from another physical planet. So this gets into a whole understanding of a cosmology, let's say, that needs to be greatly updated from the good old days of Carl Sagan and your Harvard astrophysicists, because there's no way to go from point A to B without going transiting through other dimensions. Because once you go beyond the speed of light, and you're dropping out of linear space-time to appear at one point to another, for the time that you are, well, time is not a correct term, for the episode, let's call it, of going from point A to B, you are interdimensional. You're transitioning through dimensions. So that's why I think, again, there needs to be a little more background briefing for the congressmen. I know they're very busy with other things, and some of this gets to be a bit obtuse or abstract or what have you, but the public needs to understand this because these terms get thrown around without proper definition or, in my opinion, scientific reference. I know the senior investigator for Senate Intelligence and Armed Services, back when he first contacted me, had gone out to the Lockheed Skunk Works. And he basically was shown a bunch of old jet engines and aircraft. And he knew he was being gaslit and deceived. So that's when they reached out to me in the January of 2022, a year and a half ago. So the problem is, you're not going to knock on the front door and say, pretty please let us see this. And this has happened to presidents, senior ranking members of Congress, and frankly, to the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA, and the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff that I personally briefed. All of them ran into this. So this is where my earlier caveat, people working in those facilities cannot any longer cooperate with those let's call them OPSECs, operational security protocols, because those programs are being run criminally and illegally and unconstitutionally. So that's why I'm trying to get that method, because there is a clock on this now. And this sort of do-si-do game that's been played for 75 years with this is going to have to end fairly quickly, and it needs to end smoothly without anything that could be kinetic or dangerous.